Welcome to Private Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. We are political science professors at the University of Houston. And of course, here in Houston Public Media, we are bringing you all the news pre-primary. Unfortunately, it's getting nasty out there, and the primary is definitely in full swing. And we have even more bad news, and that's that there's some notable deaths involving politics and Texas. The first is that Reverend Jesse Jackson has passed away. He had a storied career as a civil rights activist, and that led into protest politics. It led to the politics of running for office. So as an icon, what is his status in politics, and especially the Democratic Party?
Well, I think that the most interesting part is after the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., he took basically the leadership of the movement, right, of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
So I think that was very interesting to see how he started to build step by step and build a more coherent and cohesive civil rights movement. He also was a two-time presidential candidate. He brought, in terms of national politics, very interesting coalitions together. And he was always moving forward after taking the lead of the movement, quote unquote, or at least one of the main, I would say, leaders within that movement until Barack Obama's presidential election, right?
Yeah, that's a great point.
So I think that between that time and Obama's election, I think that is just one of the most interesting political lives that we have seen in these modern times.
It makes total sense to me, yeah. And we forget a lot about the struggle that takes place between the civil rights movement and the modern moment, especially when Barack Obama was elected president. But Jesse Jackson was at the tip of the spear on a bunch of these things, including like the election of Douglas Wilder in Virginia, right? A bunch of black mayors were elected in the 80s and 90s. So there was a tremendous movement that, he was really kind of at the vanguard of. So that's really interesting. I actually had a tape of the 1988 convention speech that he gave. Of course, he lost that race, but it became a real kind of rallying cry for Democrats to be more inclusive. And I had this tape, literally tape, my friend. Remember cassette tapes?
Yeah, yes, of course.
My college roommate and I would drive places. Whenever we drove places, we listened to Jesse Jackson's 1988 convention speech, which is still one of the best speeches ever given. So that is a pretty impressive legacy. And although the Democratic Party didn't respond kind of quickly and sort of embrace all those things, eventually they did. And that's real impact. That's real power. In addition, there's a Sesame Street connection. There's an NPR PBS connection. And that's that he was famous for reciting the I Am Somebody poem on Sesame Street, which is kind of an iconic moment from the early 70s. So kind of an impressive career when you get to span all those different things. Other sad news, actor Robert Duvall has passed away. He is famous for all kinds of different indie movies in the 70s all the way through leading roles in the 80s and 90s. And of course, Captain McCrae from Lonesome Dove. He will be greatly missed. And obviously as Texans, the miniseries that was produced was the cornerstone of so many different kind of origin stories of the Texas back in that moment. So definitely interesting there. I think of the two of us, I'm more the McCrae and you're more the Call, so we'll have to have a discussion about that.
Fair enough. We can have a special program just to discuss that.
I think we should.
All right.
I think people would go for that. This is an important, iconic moment for Texas.
I think so.
Sad to see, and of course, best wishes to his family. Let's talk about the primary. We are right at the precipice of this. Early voting has started. What are your kind of watching moments? What are you looking at here in the primary that you think we should keep tabs on as we get closer to the end?
So first, I think the 5 congressional districts that have been redistricted, I think those are very interesting races, pitting, for example, Democrats against Democrats, Julie Johnson versus Aldred. You have
some party on party violence. Like it's primary season.
It is. Green district versus Menifee is going to be interesting. Crenshaw also has, folks are like...
that's going to be a tight race. Mm-hmm.
Yep, outflanking from the right. So I think those are very interesting. Obviously, the Senate race here. And then I guess the other ones, I think the Comptroller race is also extremely interesting. No one cares about the Comptroller or anything like that, but it has a extremely important role in the policy-making process in Texas. Like, you cannot imagine how important that office is. So those are some of the few that I'm looking at.
Some track. No, there's a lot, I think. That's right. Yeah. And, it's sort of thought to be a sleepy primary season, but there's a lot of stuff happening. And it's going to tell us a lot about the way that the parties are migrating in terms of their ideologies. Texas has got about 18 million registered voters, about 18.7 million registered voters. So there's a lot of people out there. But honestly, most people are not going to be voting.
Yes.
We are seeing pretty robust turnout the first couple of days of early voting, but like in general, you don't see a lot of voting in primaries. So typically Republicans voting to the tune of about 1.5 million, 2 million people for the whole span of things. Democrats have basically plateaued at about 1 million. So it's definitely an indicator of kind of where the strengthened parties lie. But there's a competitive race statewide for the Democratic primary, so we're definitely going to see those numbers spike a little bit. But how much? We don't know, right? A lot of the chatter in this race has been sort of virtual. It's been on social media. So whether it actually translates into on-the-ground support, we don't know. But early voting has been pretty robust. Harris County's voting compared to 2022 is up 200%. Tarrant County, the Democrats outvoted Republicans on day one to the tune of about 2,000 votes.
Right.
And normally that's flipped. So there is some real energy happening out there. So I'm definitely watching that to see like where the turnout's higher. You're also seeing the turnout be affected by how much is being spent. So the Republicans are spending about $1 million in Harris County, and that's compared to about $500,000 for Democrats, and this is collective. So it's possible that like Greg Abbott's attempts to try to make Harris County more red could work in this. So we know that there's opportunities there for that. So it's possible that that could be an issue. But right now, Democrats are jazzed up, and I think you're seeing that play out on the ground. Let's talk about some other kind of internal political tragedies. This comes from the San Antonio region, and it's involving a congressman. That's Congressman Tony Gonzales. He has been reported to have had an extramarital affair with an aide who then unfortunately killed herself. This is obviously bad timing for him politically. It's a tragedy in general, but it definitely has political implications. What do you think this means for that very tight race?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, it's extremely unfortunate, right? That someone killed herself for whatever reasons, whether this is a reason or not. But that's just not the way to do. And I think it depends, right? This is a very salient issue in terms of distinguishing between these that, in my mind, is a human tragedy rather than a political scandal, right?
Yeah, like does it affect him in particular?
Right.
It does in a way because obviously like his kind of approach in this was improper and problematic, and that whether it led to it, as you say, or not, is a different question. But we are right at the beginning of early voting. And if you remember from 2022, Van Taylor had the exact same, similar problem, not exact same problem, but it was revealed that he was having an affair too. Basically, he dropped his race. People have called for Gonzales to drop too. Of course, at the time of a recording, he has not, but he very well might, because he's in a pretty competitive primary against Brandon Herrera, who is very conservative and sort of has been referred to, I mean, he refers to himself this way as the AK guy. So he's very right-leaning. It's a second race where they run against each other. This could be a very competitive primary, and potentially it could cost Gonzales his seat. Now, we always talk about how scandals don't matter, and I think that's generally true, but if it is going to matter, it's going to matter in a primary. And so that's where I think things are.
Especially because you're talking about a very particular segment of the electorate, right? And for that particular segment, it may have a very important implications. We'll see.
And Gonzales is running ads basically saying that like veteran suicide is a huge issue. The area that he represents is several military bases, lots of retired military, so it's a definite prominent issue. And he's running these ads that are kind of talking about the tragedy of this. And so the timing is really bad for him politically. And it does mean, I think, potentially that he's going to be in trouble. The polling has Herrera up a little over Gonzales. And so Gonzales needs really good turnout and probably a good messaging bump to be able to accomplish this. But this is not going to let that happen. Yeah. So I think in terms of those dynamics, it's going to be kind of complicated. So we'll continue to watch that story and see what happens. But it does have potential implications to kind of what the delegation looks like from Texas, which, as you said, is really in flux. There's a lot of different races that are going the primaries that are open, and we're going to see some of those changes, I think, pretty effective. Let's talk about some statewide races because we've got more scandals, yet more controversy happening. Greg Abbott's candidates have struggled a little bit. You've got Don Huffines up big over Kelly Hancock in the controller's race, like you said. Sid Miller, who's become a kind of notable enemy of the governor, is up over of Nathan Sheets, who's been endorsed by Governor Abbott. So obviously there's a lot going on there. But this week, Nathan Sheets opened up to an audience he was speaking to about his former addiction to pornography, alcoholism, and told about an extramarital affair. Again, do you think this is going to have an impact on primary voters who are looking at kind of every little detail, right? Scrutinizing all of the specifics of these candidates?
I mean, yes and no, because I think that open it up so publicly, on the one hand, is going to deactivate potential attacks, right, coming forward. Yeah. And also, I think that it plays well in the primary electorate as second chances, as forgiveness, as redemption, as I'm a changed man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those stories tend to resonate very well. We haven't seen that so far in some of the polls, but I think that politically speaking, right, without going into the human nature of his announcement, I think that it is a very savvy political issue that eventually people would know about it.
Yeah. I think he's trying to cut off some of the kind of sort of whispers about this, right? Yep. It hadn't been a story that was publicly reported, so it became kind of that way after he mentioned it. Right. And Sid Miller, being magnanimous, in a press release said, I won't talk any more about this. And that was the first time I even heard that it happened. So Miller obviously here trying to play that up a little bit. But Miller's whole campaign has been basically like, the Sheets is not ready for this job and doesn't know agriculture, doesn't know farmers and ranchers. And so there's still going to be this tense fight about that. And that race could be pretty interesting because you could potentially see where you've got antagonists to Governor Abbott in office, Comptroller, potentially with Don Huffines if he wins, and then you've got Sid Miller back in the spot at Ag. It could be really interesting to see how all the executives are agency heads are fighting.
And that is one of the most interesting, I would say, political characteristics of Texas, having that pluralistic and plural executive that have different mandates and different constituents. It's very interesting.
It's fantastic.
It is.
It's been a while since they've had any real battles. I mean, lieutenant governor and governor often do because there's like a legislative agenda. But like usually the agencies are tend to kind of fall in line behind the governor. At least they had for Governor Abbott. There have been some high profile debates with Governor Perry when he was in office with the Comptroller, but usually they kind of line up behind. And in this case, we could see some real friction. So we'll watch and see how the primaries play out. But let's talk about the Controller's race for primary, because it was reported this week that Don Huffines' family owns a former Epstein ranch in New York. The spokesperson said that the family bought the ranch at public auction, and all the proceeds were going to the victims who were at that ranch. New Mexico lawmakers have approved an investigation into the ranch. To his point, John Huffines says, we knew publicly about this. We didn't hide it. We were cooperating with law enforcement who, if they wanted to come search and look, they could. So do you think, again, this is sort of political liability for Huffines, who has got a pretty sizable lead, at least in terms of public polling, on his nearest rival for the Controller's race?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not so sure about this one.
Yeah.
Because Huffines has come, once again, open about it.
Full transparency,
and it was a public option. It was not something that was done under the cover of a cloak or anything like that.
Right.
And also in the sense that there is rumors that the ranch has some grapes of two girls that were buried in the ranch or near the ranch.
Yep.
And he has said, well, you're more than welcome to come. So I think politically, I don't think that it's going to have significant impact on the race.
I think so too, and it seems like a little unfair and kind of a cheap shot, right? That this has become kind of an issue, and Huffines obviously has made this point to a lot of people. I watched an interview with him and Dana Loesch, who talked about this at length. They're going to turn the ranch into a camp for people who are Christian, and it's obviously a redemption moment for them, and it's a pretty magnanimous thing to do. It didn't get reported as such, but that to me is sort of an important element here that, you know, does sort of obviate some of this. But as you say, the rumors are the most challenging thing here. Like the toxicness of Epstein is so real that even like this kind of story, which is like removed by a couple of moments, is potentially, you know, something that's explosive for him. So he's had to spend the week explaining all of that instead of talking about the things he wants to talk about. So again, scandals maybe aren't like the thing that debilitates you exactly. It's just sort of pushes you off message. But like at the wrong time, it definitely has this sort of problematic element. So we'll see if this comes up. His opponents aren't really talking about it. And so it's just sort of this sort of side campaign, but it may get a little nastier as time goes on, and they're going to check polling and check turnout just like the rest of us are and figure out what their strategy is going to be. Let's talk about some other big news this week, and that is the dust up between, let's say, Stephen Colbert and CBS News, but also CBS News and the FCC. In the middle of all of this is Texas somehow. All roads lead back to Texas. Here's James Talarico. Here's basically the story is that Talarico had taped a segment with Stephen Colbert, and it was yanked from the air because CBS was worried that the FCC was going to investigate the potential that this was kind of unfair and that you weren't giving equal time to all the candidates. So their argument was like you should give equal time to the other people running for office in the same space. So it just exploded. It became national news. Talarico raised $2.5 million literally off of just this. It got viewed millions and millions of times. So this is the moment where Talarico may break out. I mean, he's had a couple of these moments, as has Crockett, but this is happening at the right time for Talarico. Do you think this is like the kind of final thrust that he needed to be able to win? Because polling had him kind of behind, right? I mean, it's not, polling in primaries is a challenge, so it's always dicey. But like, you know, he was down by, 5 or 6 points. Does this even things up? Does it put him in the lead? What do you think?
I mean, certainly he was the winner in terms of what happened with Colbert and FCC and CBS, et cetera, right? He was, just winning.
Yeah, and he doesn't have to do anything, except to say, well, Trump didn't want you to see this, and so here it is. But that's not 100% true, but like,
Sure. But I mean, it certainly gives him an edge, right? But once again, here the real question is the Democratic electorate is, let's say, a little bit disjointed as the Republican electorate is, right? Yeah. So you have the very progressives, right? Within the progressives, I think you have different styles. One style is Talarico. The other one is Crockett, right? And then you have the middle of the road Republican. You have your blue-collar Democrats, very few, but you still have them somewhere around it, especially here in Texas. So the big question is, between Talarico and Crockett, who's going to be more likely to get people out to vote?
It's a good question. I think they're both pretty likely to get people out to vote. Like, they're both going to get their numbers. It's just a question of sort of how much risk you want to build into the model, and both of them had different kinds of risks. So that's a question of kind of where you think the electorate's going. For Democrats, that's hard to know because traditionally, the turnout has been very wonky, right? Like, really high in 18, high in 20, really bad in 22, and awful in 24. So, like, the kind of prospect of trying to game this whole thing out is sort of unclear. So I think that ambiguity creates this sort of kind of uncertainty. But I think in this case that benefits Talarico. He gets a huge national bump, right? Which for fundraising purposes is precisely what he needs, and that's what's happening here. If this goes to a runoff, as it some chance it might, depending on how things shake out, it's conceivable that this could be kind of his momentum forward. So I do think that there's kind of some success here that he's found, but obviously it's not the only thing that people are going to be thinking about. And there are some diehard Crockett fans who say like she's the best choice, hands down. This will also spur a moment where other people are going to come to her aid too in terms of finances. So it'll benefit him, but it'll really benefit, I think, generally Democrats, and that's kind of what they need is that momentum. So on the other side of the equation, we'll talk about in a second, but like that means obviously it's going to put some pressure on those Republicans. But I want to ask you a question about the FCC and this investigation. So that the kind of ethos has always been that the FCC let talk shows alone, right? So Stephen Colbert's show, Johnny Carson, to go back in the day, I know you're a fan of Johnny Carson from way back when, as a senior type
and
citizen.
Johnny Canales as well.
Oh yeah, there you go. Wow,
but that's a different topic,
but still good. Jack Benny for you too, like all the way back when. Sure. I know. I love Jack Benny, so like 100%. But like, I think that the kind of question here that is being raised as a subtext beyond just the sort of politics of Texas is that there's a concern the Trump administration is overreaching on this, and they're applying the equal time rule too strenuously to even talk shows. So Stephen Colbert, said basically FCCU, like you can't investigate in this way. Do you think that's going to have any traction with Democrats?
I mean, yes. And the real problem here is that what the right hand does, eventually the left hand is going to do, right? So one of the bedrock, I would say, solid principles of American democracy is having a free press. The moment that you have a press that is not 100% free from governmental intervention, inference, hints, winks, or whatever, then you lose a very important footing on what democracy is. The founding fathers thought of the press, the free press, as a fourth pillar of democracy to keep government elected officials accountable. So that interference is like, I don't know.
I mean, how tight of a hand should it be? And
exactly.
How it should be applied. It's a good question.
Right.
And
because the ruling has not changed, right? It was only the say, I might now do X, Y, and Z. While CBS is in talks to purchase, Discovery Channel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like...
all these things are related to some degree. And I think, certainly Texas got swept up in this. That's a project and concept for a different time. But for sure, it has implications for the Senate race. And the Senate race on the Republican side continues. This, Jeronimo, might be the most expensive race in American history when all is said and done. Right now, it's number 2. $100 million have been spent on ads and everything all in for this Senate race. So it's pretty sizable. Donald Trump, still undecided. Like a lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats, going to have to make his decision up at the booth. But he said basically he likes all 3 Republicans running. He says that Cornyn's a good man, but he also likes the other 2. You have Ken Paxton doing one of his very few in-person events in Tyler, saying that, actually kind of pulling punches, saying like, these are all different styles of governing. I have my own style of governing. Didn't really throw a punch at John Cornyn, which is kind of surprising, even though he's been throwing punches at Wesley Hunt. Rick Perry is back in the mix. He's spent $18 million through a super PAC to get John Cornyn back and said he'll spend whatever's needed to make that happen. Perry, though, he found out the hard way, is basically a pariah to the party the same way that Kate Bailey Hutchinson was when Perry was running for governor. The way they labeled her is the way that John Cornyn's being labeled. So what do you make of the kind of thrust of the Republican side? It's going to be a runoff for sure. The question is sort of who gets to the runoff.
Right. I mean, and again, the issue here is whoever wins the runoff election, that person is going to be wounded. And that person is going to be needing a lot of ER care, especially when you think about money. So if you're thinking now that $100 million has been spent, geez,
altogether, it's going to be pretty pricey.
And then the general election, right?
Well, and here's the thing. Like, John Cornyn is the money bag of the Republican Party. If he's not in the race, then a lot of that money might dry up and go elsewhere. So Republicans are worried about not just Cornyn winning, but also like the money that represents. So let's talk about Trump, because he weighed in a bunch of primaries too. He weighed in on 38, Congressional District 9. Alex Mueller got the endorsement. You also have him endorsing Carlos de la Cruz over John Lujan.
Right.
Think about this. You had Briscoe Cain and you had John Lujan in the Texas House stumping for Trump getting his maps passed, and he didn't endorse them.
Yeah.
That could have sizable consequences here in terms of how that goes. The other thing to note is that Abbott has endorsed Cain in our Congressional District 9, as well as endorsing Lujan in 38 down south. So I wonder if that divide could be potentially a power struggle between Trump Republicans and Abbott Republicans, to the extent to which there's any kind of a daylight between the two.
I mean, sure. But also it's not the first indication. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, Governor Abbott said that he did not think that nationalizing elections was the right move or something like that against President Trump, whether it was misinterpreted or not. But that is what Governor Abbott said. And then I think that Governor Abbott backing up these candidates is just consistency of what he has been doing during the legislative session.
He's backing his House colleagues, and that makes total sense. I don't think there's any conspiracy here.
No.
I don't think Trump is personally picking people. It's just they're looking for these opportunities to see who can win. And frankly, Mueller was polling ahead. De La Cruz was polling ahead. So I think that's probably part of it. Trump needs to pick winners, just like the rest of us need to pick winners.
And we're going to find soon enough who wins in the primary election cycle. But for this week, that's it. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.